Keep reminding yourself of the way things are connected, of their relatedness. All things are implicated in one another and in sympathy with each other. This event is the consequence of some other one. Things push and pull on each other and breathe together and are one. Marcus Aurelius. Welcome to Flourish. I'm Diane Planeden, and you're in the right place if you're ready to create an inspired life. And we do so by working on our own personal development so we can be strong role models for those we love and mentor, and strong for our own personal well-being. Well, today we're on the final chapter of the best-selling book by Robert Greene in Mastery. And oh, wow. This is a lot of information to digest. But I'm just doing a book review. But yeah, I have to hang in there to the bitter end because he gives us some great ways of attaining that X factor in mastery. So how does he open it up? Well, he calls this chapter Fuse the Intuitive with the Rational. Mastery. We've come full circle now, right? All of us, he says, have access to a higher form of intelligence, one that can allow us to see more of the world, to anticipate trends, to respond with speed and accuracy to any circumstance. This intelligence is cultivated by deeply immersing ourselves in a field of study and staying true to our inclinations, no matter how unconventional our approach might seem to others. Through such intense immersion over many years, we can come to internalize and gain an intuitive feeling for the complicated components of our field. When we fuse this intuitive feel with rational processes, we expand our minds to the outer limits of our potential and are able to see into the secret core of life itself. We then come to have powers that approximate the instinctive force and speed of animals, but with the added reach that our human consciousness brings us. This power is what our brains were designed to attain, and we will be naturally led to this type of intelligence if we follow our inclinations to their ultimate ends. You know, he has probably the most valid point here of all, because why do we not do what we really want to do? You have to put what other people think aside. You really have to not worry about their backlash. And that's hard to do, to put yourself out there. It's not easy, and there's going to be haters. There's going to be haters on anything you do. So you might as well do something that fulfills you and is part of your destiny. Let's continue. He begins the chapter discussing the history of Marcel Proust and how he came to write In Search of Lost Time, a best-selling series, and Lost in French translates as wasted time, because he felt he had wasted his life. So it was an interesting reflection. And then he goes on to say, throughout history, we read of masters in every conceivable form of human endeavor, describing a sensation of suddenly possessing heightened intellectual powers after years of immersion in their field. Einstein spoke of this, Edison spoke of this, and the list goes on and on. In all of these instances, these practitioners of various skills described a sensation of seeing more. They were suddenly able to grasp an entire situation through an image or an idea or a combination of images and ideas. They experienced this power as intuition or a fingertip feel. Considering the power of such intelligence can bring us and the tremendous contributions to cultures made by masters who possess it, it would seem logical that such high-level intuition would be the subject of countless books and discussions, and that the form of thinking that goes with it would be elevated into an ideal for all of us to aim at. But, oddly enough, this is not at all the case. This form of intelligence is either ignored, relegated to inaccessible realms of the mystical and occult, or ascribed to genius and genetics. Some even try to debunk this type of power in general, claiming that these masters are exaggerating their experiences and that their so-called intuitive powers are nothing more than extended forms of normal thinking based on superior knowledge. And I would go so far to say that that can apply to any vocation that you choose. When you become so in tune and so ingrained in what you're doing, you almost can't explain how you make decisions. It's that intuition, it's a feeling, and it's an amazing feeling. And think back, maybe you've already gone down that road. Probably can do it again, right? He goes on to say, the problem we are facing here is that high level intuition, the ultimate sign of mastery, involves a process that is quantitatively different from rationality, but is even more accurate and perceptive. It accesses deeper parts of reality. It is a highly legitimate type of intelligence, but one that has to be understood in its own right. And in understanding it, we can begin to see that such power is not miraculous, but intrinsically human and accessible to us all, our own intrinsic inner feeling, right? This unseen element, which to the ancient Chinese who understood this very well, it was known as the Tao or Way. And this way inhabits everything in the world and is embedded into the relationship between things. The way is visible to the expert in cooking, carpentry, warfare, or philosophy. We shall call it the dynamic, the living force that inevitably operates in anything we study or do. It's how the whole thing functions, how the relationships evolve from within. Everything comes into play at once. It's an energy. Einstein talked about that quite a bit. Through intense absorption in a particular field over a long period of time, masters come to understand all of the parts involved in what they are studying. They reach a point where all of this has become internalized and they no longer seeing the parts, but gain an intuitive feel for the whole. They literally see or sense the dynamic. They fuse together. And he gives the example in the book about Jane Goodall, who spent so much time with chimpanzees. She could really read the dynamics that were going on within the tribes. That type of intuition, that's amazing, isn't it? The ability to have this intuitive grasp of the whole and feel this dynamic is simply a function of time, since it's been shown that the brain is literally altered after approximately 10,000 hours practice. These powers would be the result of transformation that happens into the brain after some 20,000 hours and beyond. With this much practice and experience, all kinds of connections have been formed in the brain between different forms of knowledge. Masters thus have a sense of how everything interacts organically, and they can intuit patterns or solutions in an instant. This fluid form of thinking does not occur through a step-by-step process, but rather comes in flashes and insights as the brain makes sudden connections between disparate forms of knowledge, causing us to sense the dynamic in real time. So, how do these people do it? Well, the masters, we must trust what they say. All of these people had high levels of self-awareness and analytical skills. So they knew themselves and they were deep thinkers. It would be a misconception, he says, however, to imagine that masters are simply following their intuition and moving beyond rational thinking. First, it is through all their hard work, the depth of their knowledge, and the development of their analytical skills that they reach this higher form of intelligence. Second, when they experience this intuition or insight, they invariably subject it to a high degree of reflection and reasoning. In science, they must spend months or years verifying their intuition. In the arts, they must work out the ideas that come to them intuitively and rationally shape them into a form. This is hard for us to imagine because we find intuition and rationality mutually exclusive. But in fact, at this high level, they operate together in a seamless fashion. The reasoning of masters is guided by intuition. Their intuition springs from intense rational focus. The two are fused. And not everybody's built the same. 10,000 hours, 20,000 hours, 3 years, 6 years. If you really want to become a master in your field, you will find the time to dedicate to your craft, to that imprint you're leaving for the next generation and future generations. So, what can you do to really hone in on that? He goes on to say, although time is the critical factor in attaining mastery and this intuitive feel, the time we are talking about is not neutral or simply quantitative. The time that leads to mastery is dependent on the intensity of our focus. The key then to attaining this higher level of intelligence is to make our years of study qualitatively rich. We don't simply absorb information, we internalize it and make it our own by finding some way to put this knowledge to practical use. Yes, intense focus. Every moment, every experience contains deep lessons for us. We are continuously awake, never merely going through the motions. So, how do you do that? Well, like Proust, you must maintain a sense of destiny and feel continuously connected to it. You are unique, and there is a purpose to your uniqueness. You must see every setback, failure, or hardship as a trial along the way, as seeds that are being planted for further cultivation, if you know how to grow them. No moment is wasted if you pay attention and learn the lessons contained in every experience. By constantly applying yourself to the subject that suits your inclinations and attacking it from many different angles, you are simply enriching the ground for these seeds to take root. You may not see this process in the present, but it's happening. Never losing your connection to your life task, you will unconsciously hit upon the right choices in your life. Over time, mastery will come to you. The high-level intuitive powers we are talking about have roots in our development as the thinking animal. They have an evolutionary purpose that is extremely helpful to understand and one that is highly relevant to the times in which we live. What? Is this relevant to the time we live now? Well, lucky for us, we have ancestors that have paved the road before us and how we've evolved to become the humans that we are. Understand, this intuitive form of intelligence was developed to help us process complex layers of information and gain a sense of the whole. And in the world today, the need to attain such a level of thinking is more critical than ever. To follow any career path is difficult and requires the cultivation of much patience and discipline. We have so many elements to master that it can be intimidating. We must learn to handle the technical aspects, the social and political gamesmanship, the public reactions to our work, and the constantly changing picture in our field. When we add to this already daunting quantity of study, the vast amounts of information now available to us, and that we must keep on top of it, it all seems beyond our capability. How do you get away from all this information overload, all this technology, everything coming at you at this, you know, never a dull moment in this world right now, and AI is taking off like my hair on fire. But don't get overwhelmed by it, because overwhelm leads to anxiety, and you just don't know where to start. Control your time, control your distractions, stay in control, because that scroll can get away from you in a heartbeat. He says, to go along with this self-control, we must do whatever we can to cultivate a greater memory capacity, one of the most important skills in our technology-oriented environment. The problem that technology presents us is increased amount of information at our disposal, but slowly degrades the power of our memory to retain it. Choose what you decide to remember. What is interesting to note, he says, is that many masters who come to possess this high level intuitive power seem to become younger in mind and spirit with the passing years, something that should be encouraging to us all. They do not need to expend a great deal of energy in order to understand phenomena and can think creatively with increasing speed. Unless debilitated by disease, they can maintain their spontaneity and mental fluidity well into their 70s and beyond. And he goes on to talk about Zen masters and Benjamin Franklin, who, well into his 80s, was sharp as a whip. And if you've ever thought about your lifespan and how we're living longer, it's not by mistake. People who take good care of themselves, both mentally, physically, and spiritually, live longer. So what's the next one? Well, the return to reality. As individuals, we can participate in this trend simply by pursuing mastery. In our apprenticeships, we naturally begin to learn the parts and making various distinctions, the right and wrong way to proceed, the individual skills to master, and their particular techniques, the various rules and conventions that govern the group. In the creative active, we begin to melt these distinctions as we experiment with shape and alter these conventions to suit our purpose. And in mastery, we come full circle, returning to the sense of the whole. We intuit and see the connections. We embrace the natural complexity of life, making the brain expand to the dimensions of reality instead of shrinking to the narrowest specializations. This is the inevitable outcome of deep immersion in a field. We can define intelligence as moving toward thinking that is more contextual, more sensitive to the relationship between beings. It is no longer the simple ecosystem of years gone by. The brain of a master is so richly interconnected that it comes to resemble the physical world and becomes a vibrant ecosystem in which all forms of thinking associate and connect. This growing similarity between the brain and complex life itself represents the ultimate return to reality. But now here comes the really good part. We're going to get into the strategies for attaining mastery that I mentioned at the beginning of the show. Mastery, he says, is not a function of genius or talent. It is a function of time and intense focus applied to a particular field of knowledge. But there is another element, an X factor, that masters inevitably possess, that seems mystical, but that is accessible to us all. Whatever field of activity we are involved in, there's generally an accepted path to the top. It is a path that others have followed, and because we are conformist creatures, most of us opt for this conventional route. But masters have a strong inner guiding system and a high level of self-awareness. What has suited others in the past does not suit them, and they know that trying to fit into conventional mold would only lead to a dampening of spirit, the reality they seek eluding them. And so, inevitably, these masters, as they progress on their career paths, make a choice at a key moment in their lives. They decide to forge their own route, one that others will see unconventional but suits their own spirit and rhythm, and leads them closer to discovering the hidden truths of their objects of study. This key choice takes self-confidence and self-awareness, the X factor that is necessary for attaining mastery. This key choice, I'm repeating myself, this key choice takes self-confidence and self-awareness, the X factor. That is the X factor. And I'm going to link in the show notes a whole series I did about self-awareness and how you can really hone in on that skill. So, what are these ideas he wants to give us? Number one, connect to your environment, primal powers. Understand the ability to connect deeply to your environment is the most primal and in many ways the most powerful form of mastery the brain can bring us. We gain such power by first transforming ourselves into consummate observers. We see everything in our surroundings as a potential sign to interpret. Nothing is taken at face value. We can look at our interactions with the public, how they respond to our work, how people's tastes are constantly in flux. Over the years, as we progress on this path, we begin to merge our knowledge of these various components into an overall feel for the environment itself. Instead of exerting and overtaxing ourselves to keep up with a complex, changing environment, we know it from the inside and can sense the change before it happens. An amazing feeling. To become such sensitive observers, we must not succumb to all the distractions afforded by technology. We must be a little primitive. The primary instrument that we depend on must be our eyes for observing and our brains for analyzing. You must see your environment as a physical entity and your connection to it as visceral. If there is any instrument you must fall in love with and fetishize, it's the human brain, the most miraculous, awe-inspiring information processing tool devised in the known universe, with a complexity we can't even begin to fathom, and with dimensional powers that far outstrip any piece of technology in sophistication and usefulness. You are you're your own superpower. Your own superpower. Number 2, lay to your strengths. Supreme focus. And it gives a few examples, Einstein, Mozart, and what they gave back to society. What's that famous quote from Einstein? Imagination is more important than knowledge, right? So he talks about Einstein here and says imagination and intuition played a far larger role in his discoveries than his knowledge of science and mathematics. If he had any qualities that were extraordinary, they were his patience mixed with his extreme tenacity. There are many paths to mastery, and if you are persistent, you will certainly find one that suits you. But a key component in the process is determining your mental and psychological strengths and working with them. To rise to the level of mastery requires many hours of dedicated focus and practice. You cannot get there if your work brings you no joy and you are constantly struggling to overcome your weaknesses. You must look deep within and come to an understanding of these particular strengths and weaknesses you possess, being as realistic as possible. Knowing your strengths, you can lean on them with utmost intensity. Once you start in this direction, you will gain momentum. You will not be burdened by conventions, and you will not be slowed down by having to deal with skills that go against your inclinations and strengths. In this way, your creative and intuitive powers will be naturally awakened. And I'm just going to pause for a moment there and just say, the problem with this is, depending on your situation, maybe you're working paycheck to paycheck right now. Maybe you're in survival mode and you don't feel the freedom to create. You are getting absorbed by distractions and hearsay and chit chat and gossip. Don't fill your brain with that. Fill your brain with something that's going to make you thrive. It takes time to get out of survival mode, but like he says, if you're patient, mastery will eventually find you. And he goes on to say, understand, achieving mastery in life often depends on those first steps that we take. It is not simply a question of knowing deeply your life's tasks, but also of having a feeling of our own ways of thinking and for perspectives that are unique to us. Empathy plays an enormous role in learning and knowledge. Even scientists, renowned for their objectivity, regularly engage in thinking in which they momentarily identify with their subject. Other qualities we might possess, such as a penchant for visual forms of thinking, represent other possible strengths, not weaknesses. The problem is that we humans are deep conformists. Those qualities that separate us are often ridiculed by others or criticized by teachers. People with a high visual sense are often labeled as dyslexic, for example. Because of these judgments, we might see our strengths as disability and try to work around them in order to fit in. But anything that is peculiar to our makeup is precisely what we must pay the deepest attention to and lean on in our rise to mastery. Mastery is like swimming. It is too difficult to move forward when we are creating our own resistance or swimming against the current. Know your strengths and move within them. Get into that flow. And then number 3, transform yourself through practice. The fingertip feel. He really hones in on this about stories about fighter pilots and how they're not born fighter pilots. You can train for that. And you just really become so ingrained in one that he says the ability to master complicated skills by building connections in the brain is the product of millions of years of evolution and the source of all of our material and cultural powers. When we sense the possible unity of mind and body in the early stages of practice, or are being guided towards this power, it is the natural bent of our brain to want to move in this direction, to elevate its powers through repetition. To lose our connection to this natural inclination is the height of madness and will lead to a world in which no one has the patience to master complex skills. As individuals, we must resist such a trend and venerate the transformative powers we gain through practice. Number 4, internalize the details, the life force. And gives example in the book of one of my favorite people in history, which is Leonardo da Vinci. He was a true polymath, but did you know he was born out of wedlock and was not given the privilege of going into formal education? He was self-taught, and he began with drawings and getting into the details and literally absorbing and being one with his subject matter. A brilliant, brilliant painter, inventor, engineer. I mean, it's incredible what that man accomplished. And aren't we lucky to still be able to see his art and have his knowledge shared for generations to come? That's the Mona Lisa you're looking for. What is your Mona Lisa? I'm going to put that on my vision board. What is your Mona Lisa? It's such a small painting, too. Such intricate detail. Robert goes on to say, you must see whatever you produce as something that has a life and presence of its own. This presence can be vibrant and visceral, or it can be weak and lifeless. A character in a novel, for instance, will come to life for the reader if the writer has put great effort into imagining the details of that character. The writer does not need to literally lay out all these details. Readers will feel it in the work and will intuit the level of research that went into the creation of it. All living things are an amalgam of intricate levels of details, animated by the dynamic that connects them. Seeing your work as something alive, your path to mastery is to study and absorb these details in a universal fashion to the point at which you feel the life force and can express it effortlessly in your work. Oh, that's so inspiring. And number 5, widen your vision, the global perspective. And he gives an example in the book about Freddie Roach, who became quite famous as a coach for boxing. And he says, in any competitive environment in which there are winners or losers, the person who has the wider, more global perspective will inevitably prevail. The reason is simple. Such a person will be able to think beyond the moment and control the overall dynamic through careful strategizing. Most people are perpetually locked in the present. Their decisions are overly influenced by the most immediate event. They easily become emotional and ascribe greater significance to a problem than it should have been in reality. Moving towards mastery will naturally bring you a more global outlook, but it is always wise to expedite the process by training yourself early on to continually enlarge your perspective. You can do so by always reminding yourself of the overall purpose of the work you are presently engaged in and how this meshes with your long-term goals. In dealing with any problems, you must train yourself to look at how inevitably connects to a larger picture. If your work is not having the desired effect, you must look at it from all angles until you find the source of the problem. You must not merely observe the rivals in your field, but dissect and uncover their weaknesses. Look wider and think further ahead must be your motto. Through such mental training, you will smooth the path to mastery while separating yourself even further from the competition. Right? You have to look at the big picture. And that gets a little bit clearer the more you practice at it. You have one goal, one focus. What's the big picture? Because there's many intertwining connections there, isn't there? So what's next? Number 6, submit to the other, the inside-out perspective. Understand, we can never really experience what other people are experiencing. We always remain on the outside looking in, and this is the cause of so many misunderstandings and conflicts. But the primal source of human intelligence comes from the development of mirror neurons, which give us the ability to place ourselves in the skin of another and imagine their experience. Through continual exposure to people and by attempting to think inside them, we can gain an increasing sense of their perspective, but this requires effort on our part. Our natural tendency is to project onto other people our own beliefs and value systems in ways in which we are not even aware. When it comes to studying another culture, it is only through the use of our empathetic powers and participating in their lives that we can begin to overcome these natural projections and arrive at the reality of their experience. To do so, we must overcome our great fear of the other and the unfamiliarity of their ways. We must enter their belief and value systems, their guiding myths, their way of seeing the world. Slowly, the distorted lens through which we first review them starts to clear up. Going deeper into their otherness, feeling what they feel, we can discover what makes them different and learn about human nature. This applies to cultures, individuals, and even writers of books. As Nietzsche once wrote, "As soon as you feel yourself against me, you have ceased to understand my position and consequently my arguments. You have to be the victim of the same passion." Oh, that's pretty deep. Yeah, empathize, put yourself in other people's shoes. I think that's where that saying might come from. Perception is reality. We each have our own perception, though. So you can't control somebody else's reality, but you can empathize with them. Okay, and number 7, synthesize all forms of knowledge, the universal man, woman. And he gives example in the book about Goethe, who had quite the journey in life himself, and wrote to his friend this quote: "The human organs, by means of practice, training, reflection, success, or failure, furtherance or resistance, learn to make the necessary connections unconsciously, the acquired and the intuitive working hand in hand, so that a unison results, which is the world's wonder." And Goethe, if you don't know who he was a famous German polymath, philosopher, died in the 1800s. There's nothing new here. We have to keep these messages flowing. We have to keep this information alive and well. Humans deserve to know that they have this amazing capacity wherever you are, within you already. You just need to apply it. And you learn how to apply it by listening to podcasts like this or watching the YouTube channel. Well, what did Robert Greene have to say about that? The desire to connect will win out in the end because it is so powerfully a part of our nature and inclination. Aspects of technology now offer unprecedented means to build connections between fields and ideas. The artificial barriers between the arts and the scientists will melt away Under the pressure to know and to express our common reality, our ideas will become closer to nature, more alive and organic. In any way possible, you should strive to be a part of this universalizing process, extending your own knowledge to other branches further and further out. The rich ideas that will come from such a quest will be their own reward. Yes, it'll be your own reward to finalize your quest. And I'm going to close with a quote from Albert Einstein. The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. Do not forget your gift, the intuitive mind, and bring it all together. You deserve to live a more inspired life. Well, if you like the show, share it with somebody you know, and hey, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up. We would love to have some comments. What's your favorite book? What do you think about mastery? What do you think about Leonardo da Vinci? I'll see you next week.